Mr. Anderson here again, this time talking about the second special parallelogram, which is called the rhombus. A rhombus is a quadrilateral with 4 congruent sides. See, each side is the same length, and I've marked them here. Now again, we're going to look at our properties of parallelograms, and this time I'm going to choose to focus on the fourth one, opposite sides are congruent. And I'm going to ask the question, are the opposite sides congruent in a rhombus? Are the two sides here the same length? Are they opposite sides? And yep, this one is marked the same as this one. So the right and left sides are congruent to each other. What about the top and bottom? Again, this one has a mark, this one has a mark, so they must be the same length. They are congruent. So are the opposite sides congruent? The answer is yes, they are. So the rhombus has a property of a parallelogram. That means that rhombuses are parallelograms too. Again, that means that everything that's true for parallelograms is also true for rhombuses. This is another special category of parallelograms. To kind of use our where we live metaphor, this is kind of like rhombuses are another state inside the parallelogram country. So here, the opposite sides are parallel, right? Has the same properties as a parallelogram. The opposite sides are congruent, and we just saw that one. The opposite angles are congruent. Red equals red, right? This one is the same measure as this one, and then the blue equals blue. Here, the opposite angles are congruent. And the consecutive angles are supplementary, right? If we have a red plus a blue, that's going to give me 180 degrees. And the diagonals are bisected, just like a parallelogram. But again, because we're being more specific, we're able to know more about this shape. So rhombuses have some additional properties as well. Here, the diagonals are perpendicular. So the two lines here, the two line segments that make up the diagonals, are perpendicular with each other. When I say that they are perpendicular, that means they intersect at a right angle. And I've drawn this box in here to illustrate the fact that this one diagonal is perpendicular to the other diagonal. Diagonals have some special properties also, is that they bisect opposite angles. So if I take this diagonal, this yellow segment here, and see how it comes up here and intersects this angle up here at the top. What it's doing is actually splitting this angle into two equal parts, right? That's what we mean by bisect. So if I highlight this angle, write this angle in red, and then this angle here in blue, they happen to measure the same degrees. They are congruent to each other. So this is just an example. A rhombus will not always have a 40-degree angle here. But if it did, if this was 40 degrees, the red angle, then the blue angle here would also be 40 degrees. And this happens in all of the corners, in all of the angles of a rhombus, that they are bisected by that particular diagonal. So again here, if I highlighted this red and this blue, they are going to be the same size. So if this one was 50, right, then the blue angle would be 50. Each angle is split into two. Same thing happens down here at the bottom, right? If I have this one being 40, the other one would be 40. Same thing over here on the right. That if this angle here is 50, then this angle here would be 50. So if we bring up this chart again here, okay, notice how we have the parallelogram with its 5 properties, the rectangle with the same properties as a parallelogram, plus its 2 new ones. The rhombus here will again have those same 5 properties, but then it will have these 3 new additional ones. Because we are able to know that, we know that the shape is a rhombus. It will have 4 congruent sides, the diagonals are perpendicular, and the diagonals bisect opposite angles. Now, a rectangle or a parallelogram could have these properties, but not for sure, not guaranteed to have those properties. That's why these properties do not get a check mark under parallelogram and a rectangle. So I'm going to ask the same kind of questions that we did before. Is this enough information to know that this shape is a rhombus? Well, let's bring up the chart. What do we know about this? And I can see that it has 4 congruent sides. Each side here has 1 tick mark, meaning that they are all congruent to each other, so there are 4 congruent sides. That is indeed a property of a rhombus, and just a rhombus, so this is enough information to know that it is a rhombus. This is a rhombus. Let's see, what about this one? Is this enough information to know that this is a rhombus? Well, let's see. Let's bring up the chart and ask, well, what do I know about this shape? What is marked? And I can see these arrows, and that's talking about parallel sides. So I can see that the opposite sides are parallel. Now, that's true for parallelograms and rectangles and rhombuses, because these are just special kinds of parallelograms. But this shape does not have any of these other properties. It doesn't have 4 congruent sides. It doesn't have diagonals that are perpendicular, and it doesn't have diagonals bisect opposite angles. Now, it could have those properties, but they are not marked, so I'm not for sure to know that this shape has those properties. So I'm not able to say it's a rhombus. Now, it does have a property of a parallelogram, though, so I am able to say that it's a parallelogram because it has a property of parallelograms. But there's not enough information here to know if it's a rhombus or not. So the answer is no. There's not enough information to know that this is a rhombus. It is a parallelogram, though. So what about this one? Is this enough information to know that this is a rhombus? Well, let's just bring up this chart here, okay? And I want to say, well, what do I know about it? I can see here that the opposite sides are parallel, again, by those arrows. But now I have this other additional property, that the diagonals are perpendicular. This happens to be a parallelogram with perpendicular diagonals. And see, that is a property that rhombuses have. That the diagonals are indeed perpendicular. So a parallelogram with perpendicular diagonals is a rhombus. So this is enough information to know that it's a rhombus because it has one of these additional properties that rhombuses always have. So here's just a summary of the rhombus, that it has all those properties of a parallelogram, plus these new ones. Diagonals are perpendicular, diagonals bisect opposite angles, and that there are 4 congruent sides. Now, just like a rectangle, I'm going to give you a few pictures of some quadrilaterals, and I'm going to ask you the question, is that enough information to know if it's a rhombus? Then we're going to go over those, and then there's going to be a final video on the last special parallelogram for today. I'll see you back here in a bit.